Hi, this is Karen White of Divine Time Astrology, and today we're going to do a relationship horary chart. In relationship horary charts, what's most important is not necessarily an aspect between the relevant planets, but the receptions between the planets. Receptions show how the planets and the people they represent think and feel about each other. They are what motivates their actions or their lack of actions. You can see this information about the planets, how they feel about each other, in the table of dignities that will be covered extensively in the upcoming course. Okay, now this relationship chart, the question is, how does he feel about me? Well, this is a long-distance relationship. They are in different countries, and the querent, the person asking the question, had not heard from the guy that she was having the relationship with for a while. So she asked this question. In the relationship question charts, the querent, if it's a woman, is represented by 3 planets. The ascendant, which of course the first house, and the planet that rules that, and in this case it's Jupiter. So she's represented by Jupiter. Jupiter represents her basic personality, her head, basically what she thinks. And then she also gets Venus, which represents her as a woman, the part of her that wants a mate, and the moon. The moon represents her heart. The quested, which is the person that's being asked about, is a man. And we see her on the 7th house cusp, that Gemini, we see Gemini here on the 7th house cusp, which means that he is represented by Mercury, because Mercury rules Gemini. And Mercury is representing him as a person, his head, his thoughts, his feelings. And because he's a man, he also gets the sun to represent him as man, or the part of him that wants a mate. So the question, how does he feel about me, determines what we look at first. So what we're looking at first here is, what is he thinking about? Okay, here we see Mercury in the sign of Cancer. Well, any planet in the sign of Cancer exalts Jupiter. So he's having really good thoughts about her. However, his planet is in a mute sign, which means he hasn't been communicating to her. He hasn't been saying anything to her. And because it's right here on the cusp of his 2nd house, this means that what he really, really likes about her is how she feels about him. As we see here, the 2nd house cusp is ruled by the moon. Well, the moon represents her heart. And we see here the moon is in his house, ruled by him, which means she is loving him. Well, he really likes that. And if we look at the sun to see how he's feeling about her romantically, and what we see is that the sun is in its own sign of Leo. This means that he's a good guy. He's not a bad man in any way, but he's much more concerned about himself now. The sun was in the sign of Cancer, and that was showing that he was exalting her and putting her up on a pedestal, basically, which is what exaltation means. He was liking her quite a lot. But now he's become concerned about himself. Another interesting thing about the sun being in the sign of Leo is that any planet in the sign of Leo really hates Saturn. So what is Saturn? Well, if we go over to his house and count from his house, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we see that his 9th house is ruled by Saturn. The ninth represents other countries. So he's not liking the fact that they're having a long distance relationship. Okay, while he really likes how she feels about him, because the second house is the house of self-esteem, he's in his house. He's not coming out. He's going to be staying there. Also, the sun, it's in the 8th house, which means it has a hard time acting out in the world, is another way of saying, too, that he's not going to be able to come out and have a relationship with her, at least not a normal relationship. And another way to see this also is by Venus, the planet that represents the querent as a woman, being in her 9th house of other countries. And it's ruled by Mercury, which we've already established represents him. It's ruled by Mercury, and it's exalting Mercury. Also, any planet in the sign of Virgo is a sign that likes Venus to some extent, but dislikes Venus a lot more. And in this context would mean that this part of her is blaming herself for him not contacting her. She's thinking that she did something wrong, or he would be contacting her. Her head, as we see here, Jupiter, is exalted in its own the sign of Cancer, but it's over in his house, and it's ruled by his 2nd house lord, which means that she really wants his esteem. She wants him to want her as well. Venus, representing her as a woman, being in the sign of its detriment, is showing also that she is vulnerable, and how she feels about him is making her vulnerable. And it's in the sign of Virgo, and also any planet in the sign of Virgo doesn't like Jupiter. Well, Jupiter is her head. Now, it's in a mute sign, so she hasn't been saying anything, but Venus here is in a loud voice sign. So perhaps in their last conversation, she said something that she's regretting now. So as we see here, even if there was an aspect between their planets, which there isn't going to be here for a while, it's how the planets are feeling about each other, or basically how he's feeling about her, that determines whether or not the relationship will continue. And while he does like that, how much she likes him, or how much she's loving him, he's tired of the long distance thing, so he's going to be concerned about himself from now on. So this was the end of the relationship. They didn't pick up communications anymore after this, after she asked me this question and we did the chart. So often with love questions, the answer is a negative one. And it's because the chart is usually confirming the querent's intuition that there's something wrong. And this confirmation, while it was painful for her, it did help her to start to move on. As you can see here, Venus, her as woman, the part of her that's feeling the worst, the next sign it goes into is its own sign of Libra. And it's her 10th house, so she's going to be focusing on work, and she's going to be feeling okay about herself again. It's going to take a little while for her head to stop wanting him to give her his esteem, because Jupiter is a slow moving planet. It's the second slowest moving planet. Saturn's the first, and it's going to be a while before it changes signs. So she's going to be wanting that, but this part of her, at least, her as woman, the part that wants to be in a relationship, that is going to be okay. She's going to be fine there. And then, of course, the moon, well, the moon moves very quickly, and her heart is going to, well, we see here it's towards the end of the sign already, 27 degrees. So while her heart's loving him now, the lack of communication between them, there's not going to be enough to feed this feeling. So it's going to go into Cancer next, and it will want his esteem, but it's really okay because the moon in its own sign is okay. Now, while her mind won't forget him for a long time, her heart and her as a woman, they're going to be just fine. Okay, another important point about relationship question charts, and that is she would only get Venus and the moon to represent her, different parts of her, if Venus or the moon was not already being used by the quested. Say, for instance, if this was Aries here on the first house cusp, and she was Mars, and this over here, the quested, the person she's asking about, was ruled by Venus, then she wouldn't be able to use Venus to represent her as a woman. If this was Capricorn here on the ascendant and she was represented by Saturn, then the seventh would be represented by the moon. So we wouldn't be able to use the moon to represent her heart. And that does happen sometimes. Sometimes a woman will be asking a relationship question, but the sign on the first house cusp is Leo, which means that she's the sun. So therefore, the man, we can't use the sun as a secondary planet to represent the man. If she was Leo here, what would be on the seventh house cusp would be Aquarius. So he would be Saturn, and we would have to see everything that he's thinking and feeling about her through the one planet. That's a very important thing to understand about relationship questions. Okay, now for our little quiz. Number 1, what are the receptions and what do they show? Number 2, where do you find out how the planets feel about each other and what they're thinking about each other? Number 3, what planets do a woman get in a relationship question if she is asking the question? And number 4, what if the seventh house ruler was also ruling Venus or the moon? Okay, so now you can pause the video, write down the answers to the question, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Now for the answers to the quiz. Number 1, what are the receptions and what do they show? The answer is the receptions are shown by the signs the planets are in, and the signs reveal how the planets are thinking and feeling about each other. They show the motivations of the people involved. Number 2, where do you find out how the planets feel about each other? The answer is the table of dignities, which you will learn about more later in the full course. Number 3, what planets does a woman get in a relationship question if she's the one asking the question? Answer, the first house ruler, Venus, and the moon. Venus represents her as a woman, and the moon represents her heart. And number 4, what if the seventh house ruler was Venus or the moon? Then what? Answer, then the querent could not use that planet to represent her as a woman or as her heart, and everything would have to be seen with the one planet or two planets. Okay, so how did you do on the quiz? I'm guessing you did really well. So stay tuned. There's going to be another video later this week. This time it will be a court case question, and I'll show you how simple that can be. In the upcoming in-depth horary course and practice, we will be doing a lot of relationship question horary charts. And that is because love and career seem to be the two main questions that horary astrologers get in their practice on a daily basis. Thank you for listening. This has been Karen White of Divine Time Astrology.